Perhaps first you'd clarify the work of a hospice and how different it is from a hospital.
Well, as you said, it's about the quality of life remaining, however long or short that time might be. So it's something that comes between a hospital and a patient's own home, offering something of both, really. But at the point where the acute hospital says, we cannot do more actually to cure this disease, but you do need skilled help to control its results and to give you the best possible life you can have.
Tell us about David. Where did he come into your life?
Well, this was a long time ago. Having been a nurse, I was in fact working as a social worker in a teaching hospital in London. And in the very first ward that I took over, there was this young Polish Jew who was just 40 at that time, who didn't know, as I did, that he had an advanced cancer, who had no family and really very few friends. And I followed him up as his social worker. And when he became more ill, he was admitted to another hospital in another part of London. And I was really one of his few friends, and I spent a lot of time visiting him. And I suppose, in a way, it sounds a strange relationship, but we became to know each other on a very deep level in the 2 months or so that he had left. And there was obviously a tremendous need for him to give some meaning to his life, because here he was, dying at the age of 40 and feeling really no ripple on the pool. It hadn't made a difference that he'd been there. And talking about those needs of his to understand sort of who he was, what has happened and so on, the idea of somewhere that could have helped him better than the busy, busy ward he was in, good though his ward sister was, sort of grew up between us. And so, as I say, when he died, he left me this money.
And he said that was for a window,
yes,
for
he
a
did.
hospice, didn't he?
Yes, because he was just talking about it, and he suddenly laughed and said, "I'll be a window in your home." And then one other thing he said became a very important part of hospice. One day he was looking very sad and suddenly said to me, "Can't you do something to comfort me?" And so I repeated the 23rd Psalm, "The Lord is my shepherd," which I knew by heart. And he said, "Go on." And I said something else in the Old Testament, because after all he was Jewish. And then I said, "Well, can I read you something?" And he said, "No, I only want what is in your mind and in your heart." And although he really just meant that at that moment, in my mind afterwards, it sort of grew to show that what people like him needed was everything we could give of the mind, every skill, every understanding, but also with the friendship of the heart as well.
There are other gentlemen in your life, 2 Polish gentlemen. More about them in a moment. What about your love for your father? You did like him very much, didn't you?
Yes, we loved, we fought, like lots of fathers and daughters do. And I think, you know, one always has the feeling that at the beginning of the school holidays everything you do is right, and at the end everything you do is wrong. But in fact, really, basically in both those times there's a very strong relationship going on.
Did you have a happy childhood?
No, I didn't find growing up at all easy. There was a lot of tension at home, and I just didn't fit in at school either, so I didn't find it easy. And I was a very obstreperous teenager. I remember my father saying to me, "The trouble with your feelings is they need so much relieving." And, you know, I was so tall. I was always falling over myself. I was too big. But finally, when I really became happy was when I started a nursing training.
You have the stature of somebody who looks as though they're a leader. I mean, you obviously weren't a leader in your early days. And were you in your thoughts? Did you know what you wanted to do then?
No, I didn't. I was really floundering a lot. And the only thing I could think of was to try and follow my father, who was a chartered surveyor and estate agent. And then I thought, well, perhaps if I get myself to Oxford, I might be secretary to a politician or something like that. But that wasn't really a feeling of this is what I must do or really want to do.
You only lasted a term there at Oxford initially, didn't you?
Well, I did a little bit longer than that, a year before the war and a term of wartime, because it seemed to me no place to be as a girl during the war, and rather to the disgust of 1 or 2 of my tutors, I came down and told my family, who had really said, "No, you mustn't do this before," because I had suggested it right back, "I'm going to be a nurse." And so I had to wait to get into a training school, and then I went to St Thomas's and started training.
And when you came out at the end of the war, you then moved from nursing to medicine as a doctor. So that's quite a transition.
Well,
from
no,
that stage.
I didn't come out from my own choice. In the last year of the war, I finally hurt my back, so I couldn't nurse any longer. So I went back to Oxford and I finished off a war degree and got a diploma that enabled me to become a social worker. And it was 3 years of social work back in St Thomas's. That was when, of course, I met David, that made me realise that perhaps there was something more, and certainly I already belonged in hospital. But even before that, just as I finished at Oxford, I became a committed Christian, something that happened fairly suddenly, although I'd been searching for a long time. And the feeling then was, you know, of thanks and what can I do, in a sense, to serve, and no idea what it would be. And so then I met David, and then the clues began to come.
Anthony was another big clue, wasn't he?
Yes, well, he happened later still, because when I finished my medical training, which was quite a plod in your 30s, although I had many good friends along the way by this time, when I finished that, I was lucky to get a clinical research fellowship from another hospital, which enabled me to work in one of the older hospices, who were doing marvellous, tender, loving care, but, as I might say, you know, virtually untouched by medical advance, and there really was a possibility of starting to do some work on pain control. And among the patients there, about 2 years after I'd started, came another Pole. And he was with us for about 8 months. He was a person who made a great impact on all the staff around, actually. And in his last 3 weeks, we suddenly started meeting in a new way. And,
do you mean you fell in love with him?
Well, yes, we did. We were never alone. We were always in the ward. I never could take more than an hour with him. But it's an experience that taught me, perhaps more than anything else, that time simply isn't a matter of length, it's a matter of depth. And I think at the end I could say we haven't missed saying anything we needed to say to each other, and we haven't said anything we regretted, but we've never had time to do anything more than once.
My goodness. It must have been quite a traumatic time for you after he died. I think you were saying you were always in the ward, so you had no physical contact bodily, presumably.
Yes. Well, as a Pole, he used to kiss my hand from time to time. And as a doctor, I mean, I couldn't pull the curtains round more than I would have done anyway. I was looking after him. But one evening, when I'd come back, in fact, to see that another patient was all right for the night, I did go down to see him, and we just did kiss once, as it were, praying the Lord had put up a screen.
Did that time after he died feel dreadful to you then? You did love him very deeply.
Yes, I think that it was, again, a very unusual relationship, but it piled a tremendous lot into it. I suppose it's a kind of Liebestod in a way, and that death and love and God were sort of all there together. And so therefore, because he was also a very mature person, much more mature than I was, I had to do a tremendous lot of somehow incorporating this into myself. We didn't have any ordinary things to remember. So it was a slightly muddled bereavement. But it did give me an understanding of what it was like to be so ill. And following him through some of the things he said, like when I told him how ill he was, he just said to me, "Was it hard for you to tell me that?"
Is it hard for you to tell people, in fact,
Yes,
now?
it is. And I think that gave me a lot of insight, because if it isn't hard, then I think you should hesitate, because you mind very much that you are, in fact, saying what is going to be helpful to that person.
Do most people want to know that they're dying?
I don't think anybody really wants to know that. Nobody wants to have bad news. But you come to realise by what's happening in your own body, by how people around you are behaving, by the things they don't say as much as by what they do say. But the body has a wisdom of its own. And if you can manage to say yes to the ending of life, almost in the same way as you say yes to the other things that happen in life, then it can open up, and the strengths and the possibilities of that time can be made more apparent.